Councillor Roland Warboys, Chair of Mid Suffolk District Council, and I will be chairing the meeting today. May I first of all remind you of some domestic arrangements. Toilets are situated outside the meeting room. If the fire alarm should sound, please leave the meeting room by following the fire exit signs. Do not re-enter the building until you are told it is safe to do so. Please switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation of the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting, you are also consenting to being filmed by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. May I remind members to speak clearly into the microphones and to not put their papers over the microphones. And also when speaking, not to turn away from the microphones but to continue to speak into the microphones. Can I move to the agenda, please? One more point. It is my intention to alter the order of the agenda to bring the CIFCO item forward to enable our visitors to leave if they wish to do so. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. I have received apologies for absence from Councillor Austin Davies, Councillor Terry Lawrence, Councillor David Napier, Councillor Nikki Wilshire and Councillor Janet Pearson.
Declarations of interest by councillors. The monitoring officer has granted dispensation to councillors on the board of directors for the companies for paper MC 2314. Capital Investment Fund Company, CIFCO Capital Limited, Business Trading and Performance Report. Are there any declarations of interest? None. None received. MC 2311. To confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 19th of July 2023 for accuracy only. Are there any issues with accuracy? Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Mellor. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Eburn. All those in favour, could we take this by a show of hands? That is carried. Chair's announcements. I refer you to paper MC 2312 for noting. There is a list there of all the engagements I've undertaken on your behalf. I would like to add a special thank you for Toby and Stephanie, our hosts for the barbecue at Aldercar Farm, and everyone who attended. We made a good start on fundraising for my two charities, £360 so far. I would also like to mention the Battle of Britain commemoration parade and service that I attended on Sunday. It was a powerful reminder of the debt owed by so many to so few, as pilots of Britain took to the sky with flyers from occupied Europe and the Commonwealth to fight against dictatorship and cruel despotism. The struggle against tyranny continues around the world. The material support we are giving to the armed forces of Ukraine and the shelter to its people. Also, as we hear on the news about increased penalties for dress code violation for Iranian women and their families, we should remember that last weekend also saw the anniversary of the arrest, brutal beating and death in custody of a young Iranian woman, Gina Mahsa Amini, for allegedly not wearing her headscarf correctly. The ongoing protests are being brutally suppressed. Women and girls are at the forefront of this. At least 58 school children have died, shot, beaten and poisoned. I have added my name to a statement of support sent to me by the Association of Anglo-Iranian Women in the UK, and I'm asking Jan to circulate a letter to allow members to do the same. So, let us guard jealously our own civil liberties and embed the ideals of social, racial and economic justice in all that we do. Thank you. I would like to invite Councillor Mellon to present his update.
Thank you, Chair. My announcements have been tabled, but I will just read them out. I hope all councillors managed to enjoy a break over the summer. I would like to start by marking the passing of former District Councillor Poppy Robertson, who was a member of this council from 2003 to 2015. She represented the Stowmarket Central Ward and was a member of the Planning Committee. And Poppy passed away since our last council meeting, and I'm sure all members will join me in sending our condolences to her family and friends. Work has been continuing on the administration's initial plans, and we were delighted last month to launch a new initiative, Pride in Your Place. And this has given every town and village in the district the opportunity to apply for funding for projects which improve the appearance and cleanliness of their community. This can be for initiatives like litter picking, sign clearing, graffiti removal, and the maintenance or enhancement of open public spaces, and more. So I'd like to remind all councillors that this fund remains open. Can I ask you all to encourage your towns and parishes to get involved? Also, in the last month, we have announced 2 initiatives to support small and new businesses, which are the lifeblood of our communities. Mid-Suffolk Council has teamed up with Mentor to offer start-up businesses free expert support and guidance. The Council was given funding by the UK Shared Prosperity Fund to deliver this scheme, and the programme is open to those in Mid-Suffolk who are thinking of starting a business, are in the process of starting a business, or have recently started their business venture. And meanwhile, businesses in Mid-Suffolk can also potentially benefit from a new round of funding thanks to the Rural England Prosperity Fund. Small businesses and community organisations across the district will have access to 3 grants under the fund: the Rural Business Growth Fund, the Rural Culture and Creativity Fund, and the Rural Communities Fund. And there's a list of eligible projects there. Small businesses are so important to our district, and I encourage them to visit our website to check their eligibility and explore details of these grants. And can I ask members to promote these schemes in their interactions with businesses and parish councils? Mid-Suffolk has also recently responded to a Suffolk Mind survey which identified Stowmarket and the surrounding areas as an emotional and physical needs hotspot. Sounds very interesting, doesn't it? But they have awarded £50,000 to local projects which support community and well-being. We launched the IP14 Wellbeing Fund, and we've allocated £50,000 through the Suffolk County Council's public mental health programme to 10 local projects, and this will allow them to do more important work in this area and support more people. We will continue to work with partners to address wellbeing issues in our district so that people can lead active and healthy lives. Just want to report that as leader, I represent the district on various regional and national bodies. In the last few weeks, I've attended meetings of the East of England Local Government Association, the District Councils Network, where I sit on the executive board, the New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership, NALEP, where I'm a director representing Suffolk's district councils. I also attended the LGA Leadership Academy, and next week I will be attending the Suffolk Public Sector Leaders Group. I just want to add to the table papers that yesterday we received the fantastic news that part 1 of our joint local plan has finally been declared sound by the inspector. So can I congratulate all the officers and members who have worked so long and hard to get us to this point. And we look forward to seeing the policies in the JLP make a positive impact. And finally, many of you will have seen the news that Baber Council leader Dave Busby is taking a temporary step back while he receives treatment for cancer. I'm sure all members will join with me in wishing him a speedy recovery, and we hope to see him back soon. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any points of clarification? None. To receive notification of petitions in accordance with council procedure rules.
Thank you, Chair. None received.
Questions by the public in accordance with council procedure rules.
None received, Chair.
Questions by councillors in accordance with council procedure rules.
None received, Chair.
I'd like to move on now to MC 2314, Capital Investment Fund Company, Business Trading and Performance Report. I would like to welcome Sir Christopher Haworth, Chair CIFCO Capital Limited, Henry Cook, Director, Mark Sargentson, Director, Nigel Golder, Director, Strategic Asset Management, JLL. Councillors, I would like to deal with this item in the open part of the agenda if possible. So can I please ask members to refrain from asking any questions that relate to individual tenants and the associated risks. If you wish to ask questions on those details, please can you indicate, and we will move into closed session at that point before returning to open session to vote on the recommendation in the report. I'd like to invite Councillor Winch to introduce paper MC 2314 and to move the recommendations in the report.
Okay, I'm very aware that there's a massive briefing pack for CIFCO and a lot of people are quite new to it, including myself. I'm relatively new to it. So I thought it would be useful just to give a view from 20,000 feet of what I think the most important aspects of this are. So I'm going to try and touch on 5 questions. Question number 1, why was it set up in the first place? Question number 2, why did the Green Party oppose it being set up? Question number 3, what are the highlights in the results? Question number 4, why are we asking you to approve the business plan? And question number 5, what do we think going forward? So the first issue, why was CIFCO set up, I think really relates to the state of local government finances. England is a very centralised state with a relatively low percentage of tax and spend at the local level, and local government's been under squeeze for quite a long time. So there is a desire to try and create other forms of income. And a scheme emerged that councils, local authorities could borrow money at a relatively low rate, invest in property and make a return. And the logic of this was it needs to be seen over decades. Eventually you'd pay off the loans, you'd have the property, and you'd make a steady income stream. The Green Party have been opposed to setting this up, and still are, for 3 main reasons, I think. Reason number 1 is we don't believe that local authorities should be investing in property companies outside the district. And that's a view that the government effectively has now. And our sort of test of this is if you knocked on a typical resident's door and said, are you okay if we borrow a lot of money and we invest it in property outside the district, they'd be a bit concerned about that. The second concern that we had in the setting up of the company is about we want all our investment to balance economic, social and environmental issues. And we don't believe that CIFCO did this. And the final thing's about risk. It brings in all sorts of things about property values, interest rates, things that may go wrong with buildings, and we're also worried about the general expertise within the council outside a very competent core team. So that's historically why we opposed it. We're not here today to rerun that debate. That's a debate that's been had. We now have, I think everybody knows, the CIFCO company, which is jointly owned by Suffolk and Bayborough. Both councils put 50 million into the company. 90% as loan, 10% as equity, roughly 50 million. And the company now has 21 assets and 81 tenants. So what I wanted to do is just highlight what I think is in the results for 2022-23. And I picked out 4 main things. So the first thing that would strike anyone is the reduction in the asset value. So it went from 94 million to 82.5 million, a decline a bit over 12%. When you first look at that, a bit alarming, but property values will go up and down. It would be a problem if you needed to or wanted to sell some of the assets, but what would be a real problem if the income was dropping. So in itself, it's not a huge issue, but it's a concern going forward. The second thing that I think is in the results is the company is generally well run. There's a lot of money being spent on advisors and people trying to help de-risk the company. The income, I think, was 5.53 million, up 3%. There's a balanced portfolio, different geographies, different sectors, different sizes. The voids rate is low, the arrears is low, all of that kind of thing. So it looks like a well-run company. Two other things I think it's worth bringing your attention to. One is this deferral of the debt repayment. So what's going on here is that annually the company pays 5% of the debt to the council, and some of that has been held back because we need some working capital in the company. The money will be paid in a later year, and there has been a hit on the accounts for the late payment. It does raise the question of how much working capital is required in the company going forward. The other thing that's worth drawing your attention to is there's a table of the impact of interest rates, and that clearly shows that the margin to the council, not the company, gets squeezed if interest rates go up. Now, I've seen today that after 14 rises in a row, they haven't risen, so in the very short term, it looks like interest rates are coming down. But if you look at that table, it shows you the impact of each 0.5% racking of the interest rate. Why are we asking you to approve the business plan? First of all, what is the business plan saying? As I read it, it's basically saying carry on what's been going on over the last couple of years, and it picks out 4 things: monitoring the voids rate very carefully, controlling the spread in the portfolio, investing in certain properties to improve their relet value, and trying to roll out the EPC changes to get everything to EPC C level by 2027. There's 2 reasons why we believe we should approve the business plan. One is we oppose setting up the company, but now, as we now own it, we need it to be run in a way that limits risk and brings in the maximum income for the council. We're also concerned if we haven't got a business plan, we're halfway through the year as it happens, but it makes our governance of the company quite weak because we haven't got any yardstick to judge the company by. Where do we think we're going in the future? So at the moment, we are trying to take advice, internal and external, on a number of issues. Some of them came up at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, but they're things around the overall risk of the company, impact of interest rates, what would be the impact of selling an asset and using the money for other things. To try and find out what our options are. We're hoping to do that in the October timeframe. And the idea is and we obviously would have to do anything in discussion with Baber because they're joint owners of this company, to feed that into the next business planning cycle. So our aim is to do something in an informed and a structured way. So just a very quick summary, we've got 2 steps here. Step 1 is we'd like to approve this business plan and create a stable base that we've already got. And step 2, we will then look at what our options are going forward. And some of you will be thinking, it all sounds a bit vague, I'm not sure what they're going to do. But I think it's obvious what we'd like to do is balance financial prudency with some of the reservations that we had at setting up the company in the first place. How easy that is to do, we will see going forward. So I'd like to propose that we vote to note the accounts for 22-23 and that we approve the business plan for 23-24.
Thank you, Councillor. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Eburn.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be seconding this report and I'd like to reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We will now move to questions. Just to remind you, councillors may ask as many questions as they wish. However, they must be relevant to the subject under discussion and must be a question. Do you have no question? Councillor Whitehead.
Wasn't intending on going first, but maybe I'll be first and last, I don't know. On page 103 of our pack, under portfolio transactions, it states that the 10 rent reviews were achieved at 14.93% above the estimated rental values at the event date. Now, 10 rent reviews strikes me as a decent number, you know, statistically valid. So, do these statistics suggest to our experts here that with the valuations collating to rental returns, that our overall ERVs and therefore overall year-end portfolio values must have been done on a very conservative basis, and that perhaps our unrealised capital losses may in fact be potentially overstated? Thank you.
Nigel Golder, JLL, thank you for your question. The first starting point, I suppose, is that the valuation is at a point in time. So it's set at March. The reflection of the additional income that we've managed to achieve comes from two sources. Principally, it's a timing issue. And secondly, we've been able to create evidence which supports a higher value than there was available at the time that the portfolio was valued. So it's a matter of active asset management, we would call it, in order to generate additional income.
Do you have a further question?
So I'm not sure if that answers the question as to whether perhaps the unrealised capital losses may be potentially overstated.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. So I think your question is, are the losses greater in the accounts this year than they potentially could be, I think is what you're saying. So is the portfolio valued in a more conservative way rather than a bullish way? I think, as Nigel has stated, valuations are always a snapshot in time, so they're always at that point of time. They also tend to look backwards rather than looking forwards, because they're looking at the evidence that has accrued over the previous, say, 3-4 months time. So they're always going to look backwards. I think in relation to your point about the rent reviews and the lease renewals that we've stated, the valuation this year would have taken those into account because they're things that had occurred. So I think it's unlikely. I think the valuation that we've got as at the 31st of March is a fair one. There's always a degree of variation in terms of those figures. If you have different valuers valuing them, they'll come up with a figure that's within a reasonable range, but there will always be a slightly different interpretation. But I think it's a fair one in reality.
Thank you very much for your answers. Are there any further questions? Councillor Scarf.
Thank you, Chair. One thing I didn't ask when I was at the Scrutiny Committee was about the investment guidelines. That's page 135. We are in breach on no more than 35% of the portfolio to be held in a specific sector at any one time. I know the reason why we hold that, because actually that's the best performing sector in the market at the moment. But should we consider a change in the investment guidelines, or is that literally the investment guidelines for the length of the time that we have the portfolio? So should we be considering changing that? Because anyone who looks at that thinks, well, they've breached that. Your advice, please.
Thank you, Councillor. So the investment guidelines were set up particularly when we were in the acquisitive phase of setting CIFCO up. And so they were the original guidelines that we looked to use. We did, as a board, consciously decide to be overweighted in the industrial sector because it was the better performing sector. I think because we're not looking at, we're not in an acquisitive phase anymore, I think it's fair to have those investment guidelines almost reflecting what our strategy was previously. I think if we were ever to become acquisitive again, we might want to look at those investment guidelines and see whether we wanted to change them. You know, they're broadly sound investment guidelines, but it's about responding to the market and the circumstances and opportunities there are at the time. So we potentially would look at them in the future if we were ever acquisitive again.
Are there any further questions? We'll now move to debate. Councillors will only be allowed to speak once for 3 minutes, and this will be timed. Who'd like to start, please? Councillor Caxton.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I will be voting for this business plan. I'm a big fan of CIFCO. I think the portfolio holder talks about looking at economic, environmental and social positives within the investment, but all that will come later. This is a great legacy, this CIFCO portfolio. There'll be councillors that aren't even born yet having conversations on how we can make this portfolio more ethical in many other ways, long after we've paid off the money for it. It's, I think the management of this is absolutely excellent. We looked at this in scrutiny, and I personally was very impressed by what was going on, especially the EPC, the work being done for EPCs. It's all very good, but yeah, it's a fantastic legacy for future generations and residents in Mid-Suffolk. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Caxton. Are there any further points? Councillor Hicks, beg your pardon.
Thanks very much. Can I just say congratulations, Councillor Winch. That was a great introduction, and actually it took me back to the way we debated this only about 6-9 months ago in this chamber, and much of what you said was exactly what the administration back then said. So I guess this is the first green U-turn in, 4 months? So congratulations, we're delighted to have you on board.
Councillor Winch, do you want to respond to this, or are there further points?
Yeah, I think it's on. Sorry, I can't.
I think, can you sum up Councillor Stringer first?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to slightly refute Councillor Hicks and actually quote his deputy leader at the County Council in reflecting upon the Green-led administration here. He said, so far it's been all rather sensible, when he wrote in The Spectator last month. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stringer. Councillor Mellor.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Winch, for that very, very comprehensive overview of the report. As has already been discussed in opposition, we were opposed in principle to the concept of CIFCO, borrowing money from the Public Works Loan Board to invest in commercial property outside of the district. And I could say that the government was persuaded by the force of our argument in that they stopped the PWLB lending for this type of activity. But now that we're in administration, we have inherited responsibility for CIFCO. Some people may have expected that we would immediately withdraw given our objections, but this would not be a wise or prudent or sensible move. However, what we do think is sensible is to review what the company is doing, and by the time the next business plan is presented, be clear about what our long-term strategy is, and that is set out in paragraph 4.9 of the report. We do need to be clear-eyed about both the rewards that come from CIFCO, which are real, and the risks, and I'll explain why. The premise of CIFCO is that the council was able to borrow money cheaply from the PWLB and then lend that to an arm's length company who would purchase commercial property for return. So the return to the council exists in that gap between how much interest we pay for the money we've borrowed and the interest we receive back from CIFCO. And that's all very well if we had done what was originally intended and borrowed all the money at fixed long-term low interest rates. Unfortunately, that is not what has happened. Some of the borrowing is locked down in this way, but a substantial amount is short-term borrowing where we are exposed to rises in interest rates. And as rates have risen, they are eating away at the return on the enterprise. This is absolutely no reflection on how well the company is run. I think we can all see from this very comprehensive report that we have an excellent board of directors and a very professional set of advisors who are managing the property portfolio very well. The properties are being improved, rents are being revised upward where possible, voids are low and rent arrears are small. And I'm very grateful to Sir Christopher and his team for the work they are doing. But we do need to be aware of the structural risk that is inherent in the CIFCO operation and the borrowing we have done to fund it. And we need to monitor that very, very carefully. However, on that basis, I will be voting to approve the business plan. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I welcome Councillor Winch's acceptance of CIFCO going forward. I'm very relieved to hear that. Particularly, I welcome his realistic view of the unrealised capital losses. And I welcome them because I've seen some quite hysterical comments on local social media about that, about officers and members like playing in the casino with this sort of money. They're quite the opposite of what CIFCO actually is, which is a well-diverse and long-term investment plan. So I'm glad to hear he's not in that camp. Interesting comment on the interest rates. And for a long time I was saying, yes, whilst interest rates were low, we should borrow along and fix them. But I think the reality is that this council potentially could make a shed load of profit from Gateway 14. Profit is cash. So if we've got that cash coming down the line in a year or two, then why would we want to borrow long term for 10 or 20 years? So that's my take on interest rates anyway. And just to Councillor Winch's point where he says about knocking on doors and asking residents, I think it's a question of what question you actually ask the resident. If I knocked on someone's door and said, look, what do you think of a long-term, well-diversified risk investment that will generate cash and income to subsidise council services? So in other words, say a tenant in Milton Keynes commercial tenant in Milton Keynes is putting money into this council to subsidise services, or a tenant in Epsom or Brentwood or wherever is actually subsidising and paying part of the cost of emptying your bins. So you're not paying the full amount yourself, this commercial tenant is doing that. And I think they would welcome that and applaud it. And so I think it's just a question of what question you ask the resident as to what answer you get. So that's my take on it. I very much support CIFCO. I have done from day one. And I look forward to voting in favour of it. Thank you.
If we have no further points, I'm going to ask Councillor Winch if he has any further... Councillor Eburn, would you like to speak now?
Thank you, Chair. As everyone's aware, we were never in favour of setting up a separate investment company to invest in commercial property outside of our district. And now we're in administration, we are reviewing how this is working and how it can be improved. The key paragraph in the report before you is 4.9, where that ambition is clearly laid out. In an ideal world, this business plan, which is for the current financial year, should have been presented and agreed well before that year started. I understand there are particular accounting reasons why this is not the case, but we do need to try to bring that timing forward as much as we can. Secondly, in recent years, as has been mentioned, interest rates have increased greatly, and much of the funding supporting CIFCO, over 50% of it, is from short-term borrowing. This is a concern, and as is shown on page 63, and we do need to monitor that very closely. Thirdly, it's previously been agreed with CIFCO to delay part of the payments due to the council, as my colleague, Councillor Winch, has mentioned, in the short term. And while this is continuing, as shown in the report, again, this needs to be closely monitored. We do need to continue with upgrading the portfolio to a decent energy efficiency standard, despite the government's latest flip-flop on this, and partly because this makes sense and fits with our own ambitions, and these plans are in place, but partly because this policy is likely to change again anyway, as I suspect government will flip-flop again before the general election. So we can't just keep changing our plans according to central government whims. But hopefully we'll be able to do something about energy efficiency long before the next generation of councillors are born. But this requires investments which has to be funded through CIFCO. So while we don't agree in principle, we do need to work with what we've inherited, and we need to improve it where we can, while continuing to focus on sensible financial management and ensuring that we can meet our programme of fostering resilient, thriving communities, putting environmental and social responsibilities at the heart of everything we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eburn. Councillor Winch, would you like to sum up, please?
I'll be very quick. I think we could talk about this forever. The Green administration are never going to be entirely comfortable with CIFCO. But we need to be realistic about where we are. We've inherited a property company that's very well run, but we do want to shape it in the future in certain directions that are more in line with our principles. That's where we are.
Thank you, Councillor Winch. Thank you. I will now ask the Corporate Manager, Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now showing in blue for councillors to cast their vote. And just to say that you will need to page down because it's changed. We have changed the order. So. Yeah, can I take your vote verbally then, Councillor, please?
Yes, for this.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. That is 29 votes for.
Thank you. That is carried. Now, I think we've just have a pause for a few moments while our guests from CIFCO may take the opportunity to leave. They may stay for the rest of the meeting if they like. Right, thank you all. Right, now move on to item MC 2313. This is the Treasury Management Report 22-23. I would like to invite Councillor Matheson to introduce this item and to move the recommendations on the agenda.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, this is the Joint Treasury Management Report for the year ended 31st of March 2023. It covers the position of across that year, provides details of performance, the effects of decisions taken during that period, and compliance with the Council's Treasury management policies. The report explains the factors affecting the strategy and activities, including the regulatory framework, the economic conditions, the interest rates, and the liquidity risks. It was considered in detail at the Joint Audit and Standards Committee on 31st of July. The committee received a presentation from David Green of Arling Close, that's our Treasury advisors, and this was followed by a lengthy debate with members asking many questions. The economic backdrop for the year was characterised by high oil, gas and commodity prices, ongoing high inflation and its impact on consumers' cost of living, and no imminent end in sight to the Russia-Ukraine hostilities and its associated impacts, and the highest level of strikes and industrial action the country has seen for many years. Interest rates have climbed, with the bank rate increasing from 0.75% at the beginning of this year, financial year, in March 22, up to 4.25 by March 23, and obviously a bit more since. The Bank of England increased, oh sorry, it's there. The Bank of England increased it further to 5.25 in August, and at that time the majority of the committee judged that there might be further increases required. But I think I heard Councillor Winch say that in fact there was good news that it was going to be stabilised today. Thank you. So more specifically for our council, Mid Suffolk has reduced its net borrowing by 8.8 million, and that's net. And in fact, we've reduced by 12.6 million, and that's been offset by reducing our investments by 3.8 million. I think perhaps I'd just say at that point for new members particularly that the, this is all our cash flow, treasury management, all the different activities of the council and the companies that we own, all that cash is being managed by our treasury team. All our investment activities were undertaken in accordance with the approved counterparty list. That's the people we borrow from and lend to. And the council's investment activities included average returns that you can find in Appendix C of the report. The council's pooled funds, excluding 91 series, that's one of the companies, have experienced a drop in valuation, but an increase in the rate of return compared to 21-22. The council has complied with the upper limit for interest rate exposure. The investment activity undertaken for the year was done so in prior order of security and liquidity over yield, as prescribed in the Treasury Management Strategy. Banking activities undertaken were within the daily bank account limits, except for one occasion when the daily limit with the council's bank Lloyds was exceeded. This was due to money being received into the account after the cut-off time for transfers into the money markets, and was rectified the following day. As I mentioned earlier, the report has already been considered in detail by the Joint Audit Standards Committee, but I'm happy to take any further questions from members on the report. And I'm pleased to say that we have the Interim Corporate Manager for Finance and our Resources and Finance Director with us to help with answers. Thank you.
Have a seconder, please. Oh gosh.
Councillor Patchett, Chair.
Councillor Patchett, beg your pardon.
I'd happily like to second the proposal from Councillor Matheson. I remember on the day that we did have some lively debate, and there was definitely some constructive and challenging questions that we sort of threw towards Bob, and thankfully today Bob is joined by Melissa, so he's got a bit of backup. but I'd happily second this one, Chair.
We will now move to questions. Councillor Caxton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Now, I'm not sure if this is directed at Councillor Matheson, but is part of the report. In the environmental implications, it says that the Cabinet pushes for fund managers to filter investments in respect to ESG considerations. And then in the following paragraph, it says the Joint Audit and Standards Committee recognise that any decision to withdraw funds should be balanced against financial prudence. So could you explain to me exactly what that's telling me on there, please?
I'll have a try at that one myself, Chair. I think the point essentially is that this administration does want to align our investments, which are, in our terms, significant as a council, with our priorities for environment and climate remediation, let's call it. And so we do want to look at that. And we have a report which will be before the committee on Monday to have a look at what the possibilities are for doing that better without too significantly impacting our finances. And the reality is, as the report says, that there is we have currently got what shall we say, a reduction in the value of our investments, and so we will have to see whether we're going to declare that loss by changing our investments in line, as I said, with our priorities or not, and that's something we'll be discussing on Monday.
Thank you, Chair. Can you tell us if we still have investments in fossil fuels, and if so, how much?
Thank you. Well, my understanding is that we do, and I'm sure that our officers will be able to provide a little more information without getting into huge detail, because I know it's actually quite a complicated answer.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the question, Councillor. We don't have a detailed breakdown. Within Appendix C, we've listed the funds that the Council holds money in, but we haven't got full details immediately available of the particular other investments that are within those portfolios. So I can't give you a complete answer tonight in terms of that, unfortunately.
Thank you for that. It was a little bit hard to write. Can I just remind people just to make sure that their laptops are not in front of the microphones when they speak, because otherwise I've got a fan behind me which makes it very hard to hear as well. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Then we will now move to the debate. Councillors will only be allowed to speak once for 3 minutes, and this will be timed. Councillor Eburn.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to just make a couple of points, if I may. With regards to the paragraph 11.3 on page 24, which was about looking further at the environmental, social and governance considerations. This is something that we've been pushing for a long time, and even though it was at the Cabinet in the previous administration 2 years ago, it's only just now that we were able to get a report on this from our Treasury advisors, and I'm really pleased and give good thanks to officers for obtaining that report. And I would urge any member that's interested, it's being discussed, as my colleague said, at the Audit and Standards Committee on Monday, and it's a really good detailed report that details out what our funds are invested in, what are the potentials, where there might be financial considerations. And I would urge people to, because it's a confidential paper, so you'll be able to, as members, you'll be able to have a look at that, but I'd urge you to attend that meeting if you want more information. But equally, within that, one of the things that we have to consider is to ensure that there is, if any changes are made, then that is got properly considered, all the financial considerations, because as we mentioned in the previous one, we're looking at very sensible financial management and we need to be very clear on that. But I'm really pleased to see that coming forward, even though it's taken 2 years to get here. And secondly, I'd just like to make the point, which does relate also to the previous paper on CIFCO, is that our short-term borrowing is quite extensive. If you look at Appendix A, page 31, we've got £24 million in short-term borrowing, and obviously the issue with interest rates, as we know, they've potentially stabilised today, but who knows what will happen in the future. And I just think we need to make the point that we need to keep a close eye on that. I would urge, again, anyone interested to kind of have a good look at that and make sure we're looking at that carefully. But those are a couple of things that I think we need to ensure that we do within this, within the Treasury management system. Thank you.
Are there any further points people would like to make? Right. I think, Councillor Patchett, have you anything further to say?
Nothing further, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Matheson.
Yes, thank you. I've also nothing further to add other than that I've just lost the papers again. Yeah, there are two items for noting, and which you've got before you. So I will urge you to vote for them. Thank you.
I will now ask the Corporate Manager, Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, there's actually 3 items, 3.1, 3.2 and 3.3. So if councillors could cast their vote. Thank you. Councillor Marriott, are you having technical problems? Would you like me to take your vote? And Councillor Winch? That's great. Chair, that's 29 votes for. That is unanimous.
I would now like to move on to Item 14, MC 2315, Mid Suffolk State of the District Report 2023. I'd like to invite Councillor Mellon to introduce the paper MC 2315 and to move the recommendation in the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very happy to introduce this new report, and councillors will have to get used to seeing something of this sort every year from now on. The State of the District Report, which I hope members have had time to study, is a fascinating document. It's brought together a massive amount of data and insight from various sources and research and it presents this information in a very digestible way. The report is presented as part of the evidence for the corporate plan refresh, which is commencing next month. Now, we need to clearly understand where we are before we can set the direction of travel for the future. And I think this report does that, not only with high-level statistics, but also some fascinating granular detail. If I may, Mr. Chairman, I would like to draw members' attention to a few key bits of information in the report. Hopefully this will whet your appetite to explore further. Mid Suffolk has just over 102,000 residents living in 44,000 households. And the good news is that, on average, people in Mid Suffolk live longer than the national average. We have better levels of health, and 87% of us are satisfied with where we live. On the other side, we have less access to the fastest broadband speeds. Fewer of us have a degree level qualification than the national average, and we have much less tree cover than other parts of the country. If you dig around in the report, you will find a wealth of interesting detail. As someone who grows and sells fruit and vegetables in the other part of my life, I was very pleased to read on page 13 of the report that in Mid Suffolk, more of us eat our 5 a day than the national average. Very good news. One other fascinating fact that I would just drop in to finish. On page 4 of the report, we learn that 27% of homes are occupied by a single person. And across the country, 31% of homes are single occupancy. I just highlight that because we are constantly told we are living in a housing crisis and we need to build more homes. I think I could be pretty confident in saying there are enough bedrooms for everyone. Just a thought to ponder. So to sum up, a very, very useful report, very, very well put together, that gives us a baseline for the corporate plan refresh. I'd like to thank the strategic policy team, and in particular Chris Holmes, for putting this together in such an accessible way. And I'm happy to propose the recommendation 3.1, that we note the context of the Mid Suffolk State of the District Report 2023, and we endorse its publication on the Council's website next month. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Mellon. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Davies.
Yes, I'd like to second. And reserve right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Before we move on to general questions, I've got a question I'd quite like to ask. I must confess, a very quick look through the report. There's no information, as far as I could find, on students' progression. That's people under the age of 18 and their attainment in schools within our district.
If it's okay, Chair, I'll refer this question to the officer present, if she can, or they can provide an answer.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, quick conferring there. Yes, no, we don't have information on that in this year. We've obviously tried to keep the report as concise as possible this year, but we can take that away and reflect on it to see if that's some information that we can include in it moving forwards, and we can have those discussions with councillors in the production for it next year.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Linden.
Yes, I would like to know how many GPs there are per resident in the area. I couldn't find that information in the actual report, but it would be a very interesting and important thing to know about for future planning and all of that, not least as we can rejoice in the fact that we have a longer longevity than the average of the country. Thank you.
Is that something we have information on?
Yes, we do have information supporting our joint local plan on health infrastructure needs, and so we can look to see what information we have there and forecasting forward. We don't obviously want to be kind of repeating information across, but we can have a look into it just to see how we can get that visibility and that connection, obviously, for existing information that we hold and signposting to that through the State of the District report.
Thank you, Kat. Dear me. Yes, Councillor
Yeah, I thought this was a really excellent report with all sorts of interesting things in it. It would be useful on the housing section to have a little bit more on affordability. So maybe comparing average salary with rents, typically shown as average salary as a percentage of rental values, and maybe also comparing the local housing allowance, which is used for benefit calculations, what proportion of housing actually is available at those rates.
Councillor Winch. Councillor Hicks.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, we're merging into debate and question, but I mean, I think I agree, it's a great report and it's good to have. All I just ask is when we put it on the website, could we maybe have a link to the Suffolk Observatory? Because so much of this is actually coming out of the observatory, and that's updated daily, weekly, monthly. So then rather than just having it annual, some of this information we can get constantly updated on. Thank you.
I know that the figures wouldn't be available from the ONS, but because of the changes in what was collected in the most recent census, would it be possible to have a bit where figures are separated by gender to acknowledge that figures aren't available for non-binary people, just to tie it up with what was in the most recent census, recorded in the most recent census.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mellor.
Yeah, I think we can look at that. I'll hand over to the officers.
Yeah, certainly we can add a note of interpretation there where data is presented based on gender.
Thank you. Councillor Overett.
Thank you, Chair. Our tree canopy cover is 8.5%, which is quite a lot lower than the average across England of 16.3%. I wondered what the reasons for that are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. One of the reasons we're very aware of the tree canopy cover and the percentage is because we've had that work done, the canopy survey done, and we're able to even disaggregate that down to ward level. It does give you that kind of real level of granular detail, but it's also a challenge because we realise that we are behind other districts and we're below the national average. I know that's something that we would certainly want to improve over the next few years, and there's tree planting going on by the county council, by this district, by farmers, by lots of community groups as well. And there's two ways, I think, in which we can improve the tree cover. One is improve trees in developments. So that's a better landscaping and more tree cover within the built environment. And then more trees in the countryside in general. I know in my village, we don't have a wood. It just seems like really strange to live in the countryside and not have a wood in the village. So we do need more tree cover. It's certainly one of the priorities we'll be pushing, and I think we're alongside a lot of other organisations, including the county council, in doing that.
Councillor Pratt.
Yes, if I can just follow up on well, make comments.
We're still at the moment in questions.
Sorry, yes. Beg your pardon.
Sorry.
I'll reserve that for later on then.
Have we got any further questions? I'll now move on to debate and give Councillor Pratt the floor.
Right, brilliant. Thank you very much. Doing things in the right order, yes. I found that was quite an interesting question as well, and for anyone who's scrutinised the maps, another thing that stands out is that, well, in my ward, for example, we have at least 3 triple SIs. We have Middlewood, Bonnywood and Priestley Wood, owned by various, one's owned by the Woodland Trust, another by the Suffolk Wildlife Trust, and another one is privately owned, I believe. In other wards, so I've got like clusters, large clusters of sort of green space, clusters of canopy, but there's not really very much linking it in between. When you look at other wards, for example, Claydon and Barham, which has the higher sort of level of tree canopy in our district, you'll see that it's less clustered and kind of more dispersed kind of tree cover. Well, some of it sort of follows that linear kind of corridor along the River Gipping, but there is generally more dispersed tree cover dotted around in that ward in any case. And I think that the key thing is that a lot of the land in Suffolk is agricultural, it's under intensive farming practices, and what we really need to do to sort of start off with perhaps is infilling some of those hedgerows where there are gaps in those hedgerows to strengthen some of those wildlife corridors, and that would sort of help to improve our canopy cover as well. We'll need to work with private landowners, I might insist, as well as with looking at what we can do with our own land as well.
I think that's a good example of how accurate data and information can inform policy. Do we have any more points you'd like to make? Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to say I do think this is an excellent and informative document, and I commend the officers who have collated all this information. It's a fascinating read for members, staff and residents, and I'm happy to endorse its publication on the Council's website in October. The reality being, of course, it's already on the website as part of these meetings' public documents, so it would actually be a bit awkward if we don't endorse it. Like our Prime Minister, I'm a convinced but pragmatic advocate for global net zero. So I read the section on emissions and housing with special interest. It's heartening to see the 36% reduction in mid-Suffolk emissions from 2005 to 2021, with domestic emissions being down 39%. Transport and agriculture at 68.2% of emissions accounts for over two-thirds of those emissions. So I'm sure in those areas there are real challenges to moving to net zero whilst maintaining the consent of our residents. And likewise, on the domestic side, under housing, we see that 99% of residents have central heating, and at 30.3%, nearly a third use oil as a single source of heating. Now, since moving house in November last year, I've fallen into that category, and I'm sure that many of our residents, like myself, will have been mightily relieved at hearing of the extension to the time frame to replace any failed oil boilers, given both current technology and the capacity of the heat pump industry at present. With 3/4 of our residents currently relying on oil and gas for heating, there are real challenges in moving to net zero that will need us to take a pragmatic, proportionate and realistic approach, both nationally and locally. So I trust as a District Council we will. Thank you.
Right, Ed. I just want to repeat that the recommendation is to note the content of the Mid-Suffolk State of the District Report and endorse its publication. Thank you. Do you have any further points to make? Councillor Patchett, I believe you did second it, but have you got any further comments to make? I beg your pardon, Councillor Davis.
I think I just wanted to make sort of, I valued this report a great deal, and I also wanted to state that from the statistics reported, we can see that the majority of us are living in a home that we own with spare bedrooms. We're happy, well educated, have jobs and live in low crime areas. But also wanted to point out that this same report will show you that there are 4,500 people living on their own over the age of 66. There's difficulty being near a GP. People seen as in a vulnerable group do not have access to the internet. Nearly 6,000 households are facing fuel poverty, and nearly 6,000 people are having universal credit to top up their wages. 20% of Mid-Suffolk children are living in poverty. 100 of those were homeless last year. So I think by collating this information and seeing a stark contrast, it's important that we see what our job is and what our role is and can be. That's it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davis. Councillor Mellor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for all the different people who've contributed to the debate. I do think that the information gathered in this report is really useful, it is a moment in time, and as Councillor Hicks has reminded us, we can access constantly updated information on the Suffolk Office of Data Analytics website. The website, the information in the report is encouraging in many ways, but it also, as Councillor Davis has just said, it does also outline the scale of the challenge, and that's what we want to set out as we refresh the corporate plan in the next few months, so we can see a very clear direction of travel for this administration, for this council. So please can I ask you to vote in favour. Thank you.
The Corporate Manager, Governance and Civic Officer to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. That is showing in blue. Councillors, you will need to tab down to find the vote. Thank you. Councillor, can I take your vote as well, please? No, if I can take it. Lovely. Thank you. Chair, that is 29 votes for. That is unanimous.
To invite the Corporate Manager, Governance and Civic Office to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. So this report asks Council to consider the principle of appointing political assistants for political groups within the framework of the Local Government and Housing Act 1989, and if it agreed, outlines the arrangements for the appointment of those political assistants should any group wish to take that opportunity. If the political assistance posts are created, they would be responsible to the appropriate group leader on a day-to-day line management basis, and but would report directly to the Director of Law and Governance. Section 3.1 of the report details the stringent conditions that need to be followed if the principle of appointing political assistants is approved. Groups will only qualify for assistance if they comprise at least 10% of the membership of the authority and are one of the three largest groups on the council. For Mid-Suffolk, all three political groups qualify and can request a political assistant if they so choose. There can be no more than 3 such appointments and only 1 for each group. Appointments can only be made if posts are allocated to each group, even though a group may choose not to make an appointment. The terms of remuneration are stipulated in the Local Government Assistance for Political Groups Remuneration England Order 2021, which provides a maximum amount which you can pay the assistants. The funding for that will be taken out of the councillor allowances budget, and just to make that clear, it says expenses budget, but it is actually the allowance budget, which has headroom due to a reduction in the number of cabinet members and a reduction in the number of planning committees. So, Councillor, I asked if you would like to discuss and debate that matter. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to propose the recommendations in the report, and I'm happy to speak at the appropriate moment.
Thank you, Councillor. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to second this motion and reserve my right to speak. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stringer. We will now move to questions. Councillors may ask as many questions as they wish. However, they must be relevant to the subject under discussion and must be a question. Councillor Caston.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Jan has explained this in a bit more detail, but I still haven't quite got my head around it. No appointments can be made until posts have been established for all qualifying groups. Now, I'm still not quite sure what that means. Could you explain that further?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so we need to allocate a post to each of the qualifying groups. That doesn't mean to say that each group has to appoint to that, but we need to say actually three groups qualify, and that they, each group is allocated a post. So that's what it means. Otherwise, if you don't specify that, you could, it could be that one group just goes away and says, oh, well, I'll have one. But it actually means that all three groups of this council are qualified, so can appoint, and we would allocate that position to each group. But it's your choice. It's down to each group's choice if they wish to appoint.
Very much, John. Any further questions? As the questions are finished, we will now move to debate. Councillors will only be allowed to speak once for 3 minutes, and this will be timed. Councillor Mellon.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chairman, political assistants are a fairly common sight across the local government family. Some local authorities have them, others do not. We haven't had them previously here, but now we would like to, hence why this report was requested by the administration, and I'm grateful for the officers for drawing it up. If you've read the report, you will see that the rules surrounding this sort of appointment are fairly stringent. The role is politically restricted, the term of employment is limited to the council term, and there is also guidance that encourages councils to carry out a value for money job assessment before the role is advertised and recruited to, with the recommendation that wherever possible, they should be employed on a part-time basis. The key point on this issue is that at 3.1, the third bullet point, this role provides assistance to the members of a political group in the discharge of their functions as members of the authority. To paraphrase, a political assistant will help councillors to fulfil their role, to do the job of being a councillor well. There are many ways in which they could do this: providing information, researching ideas, bringing best practice from other councils and other organisations, providing support in communication and organising the group. Our group has discussed and agreed that a part-time political assistant would help us to be better councillors, and therefore the organisation and the district would benefit as a result. The rules on this mean that given each group on the council has at least 10% of the seats, that all groups here could choose to have one. We accept that there is a cost to employing new members of staff. However, I should point out that there have been substantial savings made from the previous administration by having only one planning committee and by having less cabinet members. Officers will still have to carry out a value for money assessment, and this paper simply establishes the principle. But I'm happy to propose the 3 recommendations in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Any further points councillors would like to make? Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. When reporting back to parish councils over the summer, there's not been a great deal to tell them, other than the rather modest spend associated with the Pride in Your Place proposal. So I've been eagerly awaiting the first more substantive initiative coming from this new Green administration. I must confess I wasn't expecting it to be a request to officers to bring forward the recruitment of a political assistant to support the leader in his cabinet. In my 9 years in a cabinet role, I've never personally felt the need to have a political assistant. When I looked at my computer today, I found an electronic folder called Intro Speeches, containing 108 speeches I'd written myself over the years to introduce reports to Cabinet, full council, scrutiny, member briefings. I remember working over weekends and or late into the night, finalising those speeches, but never once did I desire to offload that burden onto either officers or a political assistant. To be prepared in order to write speeches and to answer questions, I've had to spend time liaising with the relevant officers, but I believe that worked better directly rather than using an intermediary between us. I've no doubt a great deal of my time would have been saved had I been able just to say to a political assistant, have my speech ready for me for reviewing on Friday. Having a political assistant would also save me a great deal of time on Google doing my own research. And the saying goes, time is money. So I wonder, will the independent remuneration panel now be asked to reassess cabinet members' special responsibility allowances should they be given a political assistant to write their speeches, to do their research, to run group meetings, and generally be their paid PAs? And apparently, and I have to pinch myself here, these PAs can even do the leader's constituency work caseload. Well, I understand the costings initiative for the current year will come out of the approved budgets, as there's only be 3 to 4 months worth of expenditure in 23-24. In the budget 24-25, that will have to do the heavy lifting for this proposal, possibly to the tune of £130,000 plus if 3 full-time PAs are employed for a full year. Now, our current 4-year medium-term financial strategy assumes a continuity of the previous 2 years of council tax freezes. If the new administration do instead decide to increase council tax next year, then clearly this additional new expense must be a factor in that equation. Well, I hope what I've just said at least in some way explains why I won't be voting for this initiative. And just for the avoidance of doubt, these are my own words, not political assistance. Thank you.
Mr. Whitehead. Have we got any further points you'd like to make? Councillor Hicks.
Thank you. I mean, political assistants, we use them at the County Council, and I have to say they are invaluable. But we are an organisation of 4,500 employees with a budget of £700 million. Mid Suffolk is a very small council in relation, so I think it is only proportionate that it should be a part-time role. But Councillor Mellon talks about value for money. Surely the best value for money would be to appoint a full cabinet who could do all the work, and then you wouldn't need a researcher to back you up and support you. That would be far cheaper.
Thank you, Councillor Hicks. Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think, just to come back on a couple of points, I think in the previous administration, Councillor Whitehead may have written his own speeches. I'm fully aware that many of his colleagues did not, and the officers wrote them. But I think that is not something that we'd expect a political assistant to do. We're looking at research, at best practice, and many district councils across the country, including East Suffolk, have political assistants. And I think it's safe to say in this group we would not be looking for a full-time role, we were looking for a part-time role. If we were to take on a part-time political assistant, that would cost just over £20,000 a year. We're currently saving the council £24,000 a year. In fact, we've already saved the council £12,000 a year with our difference in cabinet, plus the fact that with the expenses allowances, in the past, many councillors would have driven and claimed mileage. In our group, many people take the train, which is a cheaper way in terms of allowances, so we've saved at least £5,000 so far on that. So there are savings that have been made within the allowances. But I think the most important point is that it's about effectiveness. We're looking for best practices. We're wanting to look across the council. I mean, how many times have I stood up in this chamber and asked the members of the then administration, what was the best practice from another council? Where have we looked at? What are we doing? And not had a good answer. And I think we owe it to our residents actually to be able to provide more of those instances of best practice, to be able to look at those research and ideas that perhaps aren't fully formed. And we don't want to bring officers in on ideas that are maybe not quite ready to be prepared and brought to council. We want to kind of investigate the ideas a bit more, and I think it would provide very good value for money. And just to reaffirm, we would only be looking at a part-time assistant, certainly not full-time. And I will certainly be supporting this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Have we got any further points people would like to make? Councillor Scarf.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I note with interest that the majority of posts that we have at the council are shared posts, and I think I would be more in favour of it had Baber Council decided to actually go ahead, because I think the numbers then make more sense. With 9 or 10 perhaps in a group, I think there's more legitimacy to having an assistant. The point that the administration has made about a part-time assistant then leads me to think, well, how could a group as small as 6 or 4 then have a part-time assistant pro rata? Because you would probably not have an assistant for more than a day a week. So I think on balance, I think I will vote for it because it gives us the ability to actually appoint, but certainly from our group before, we wouldn't wish to appoint because we don't see that there's actually a need for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Have we got any more contributions to the debate? I'm going to ask Councillor Stringer as seconder to sum up.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, it's actually rather interesting what we've heard from the bench in the corner opposite, the benches in the corner opposite, because some of us in this room have experience of having researchers both in administration and in opposition. And as far as I can see, in opposition, we've never used a researcher to write a speech. What they've researched are the facts and best practice and accurate details to form part of the ideas that go into the speech. And I think political discourse is better served if everyone on all sides has the best possible factual information. I think that would serve democracy. So the fact that this administration wants to run the cabinet as lean as we possibly can, want to run our planning committees as lean while sharing vice chair roles as much as we can, recognising that that planning committee then has a higher workload, but we've remunerated that position to the planning committee for doing so. And can I, while I've got the microphone, thank our planning committee for the work they've done so far. You've had some really tough decisions so far, but thank you. I think you've done some excellent work, and we look forward to making more changes to make you even better. And wouldn't actually a political system be really handy in the last 24 hours? We've had our joint local plan, part 1, now approved by the inspector. And thank you again to all the staff and to the previous administration for the work you did on that. Particularly like to thank previous Councillor David Byrne for his work. But actually, with the announcements of government overnight, I'd have quite liked a researcher at District this morning to actually tell me what part of our local plan we need to change within the first 24 hours, because the government's now gone weak on all the climate ambitions that we've tried to build into that joint local plan on behalf of our residents. Much of that was based on the work we've done to get excellent environmental performance in this district out of our developers, and now one of the pivotal reasons that we've extracted that better environmental performance is now being washed away, and we would seek that not to happen, and same with our communities. So I will be voting for this because it's up to us. If we chose to have a researcher 7 days a week or 5 days a week, we could, but you could then hold us to account on that. We think we can do it in 3 days and do an excellent job. It'll be up to you to choose whether you want a political research assistant or not, and how many hours a week, up to 5 days a week, that would take for you to do an excellent job, because we want you to hold us to account and actually come to full council meetings with a whole list of questions on notice and even motions on notice to help push the policy of this council. You weren't able to get a motion to this council. Perhaps if you had a research assistant, you could have done that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you for all the different points that have been made. Clearly, there's a difference of opinion about this, which I kind of anticipated might happen. I do agree with the points that have been made that say that a political assistant would add to the quality of the work that we do and the quality of debate in this place. we can review it, of course, after time, and it's your job to hold us to account if that isn't working. But I don't think it's going to cost the council and the council taxpayers any more than the previous administration, and on that basis I'm happy that we go ahead to the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That is showing in blue for councillors to cast their vote. Councillor Morgan, can I take your vote, please? Against, is it? Yeah, okay. Chair, that is 24 for and 5 against. So that is carried, Chair.
Thank you. Item 16, council appointments. The appointments have been tabled. Are there any further changes to the appointments? None received. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Mellon. Could I have a seconder? Councillor Mansell. Thank you. I will now ask the Corporate Manager, Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. That is showing in blue for you to cast your votes.
For.
Thank you.
I don't know what's gone wrong with mine.
Councillor Morgan, can I take yours? For. Thank you.
So this is the first time mod.gov's ever frozen for me.
I
But
think
I
it's
have to
doing-
keep closing it and opening it again, but I'm for.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Patchett, are you having trouble as well? Can I just take how you voted so I can, it's not come through? Oh, it's just come through actually, yeah, thank you. Chair, that is 29 votes for, that is unanimous.
Thank you. That is carried. Are there any motions on notice?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Well done, everybody. The next meeting is on Thursday, the 26th of October, 2023 at 5:30 p.m. I now close this meeting.